Hello, Sagittarius. I can't help but feel like something powerful is quietly building around your energy right now. And what's interesting is, the moment you found this reading doesn't feel random at all. It feels like a truth that has been lingering beneath the surface is slowly making its way into the light. And if you've been listening to your intuition lately, there's a good chance you've already been sensing it. I'm picking up on the energy of someone who has spent a lot more time thinking about you than they've ever admitted. They may not have said much. They may have kept their distance. They may have chosen silence instead of honesty. But the quieter they've become, the more they've been forced to see things from a different perspective. There's something about your energy, Sagittarius, that they can no longer look at the same way they once did. The more they've observed, the more they've reflected, the more they've sat alone with their thoughts, the more they've realized that there are certain feelings and certain truths that can't be avoided forever. So the question is, what was it that finally started changing their perspective? And why does it feel like everything is beginning to shift right now? I feel like the answer lives in the silence, a silence that has lasted longer than usual. The kind of silence that shows up when someone stops reacting the way they always used to, when messages are no longer sent right away, when a person stops trying to pull everything back to what it once was and starts spending more time with themselves instead. The very first card that comes through for me here is the Hermit card. And what's interesting is that this doesn't feel like distance caused by a lack of feelings. It feels more like someone intentionally stepping away from the noise, stepping away from other people's opinions, stepping away from expectations they've carried for a long time. This person has been thinking far more than Sagittarius may realize. I keep seeing the image of someone sitting alone long after everything seemed to be over, not talking to anyone, not trying to explain themselves. Just sitting there, replaying the entire journey in their mind. There are truths they've tried to avoid, feelings they once believed they could control. But the quieter things become, the harder it is for them to keep lying to themselves. Right beside it, the Four of Swords card appears. This energy feels like a forced pause. Life has slowed them down. Some may be dealing with pressure at work. Others may be navigating changes within family dynamics or other relationships. But no matter what is happening around them, their mind keeps returning to the same place. The same person. And honestly, I can't help but feel that person is Sagittarius. What's especially interesting is that Sagittarius doesn't seem to be standing in the same place anymore either. I don't see the energy of someone waiting. I don't see someone trying to prove anything. I see someone gradually returning to themselves, focusing on their own life, learning how to invest their energy into things that genuinely deserve it. And that shift may be exactly what's making this person nervous. Because before, they always assumed this connection would still be there. They always felt like there would be more time, like everything could be sorted out later. But distance has a way of creating an entirely new perspective. And that's when the Temperance card comes through. Every time I look at this card here, it feels like something is quietly rearranging itself inside this person's heart. Not the kind of change that happens overnight, not a sudden awakening. More like layers of awareness slowly being peeled back. They're revisiting old decisions, questioning why they reacted the way they did, why they were afraid, why they overlooked things that mattered so much. And the deeper they go, the more they realize this connection meant far more than they ever allowed themselves to admit. There's regret here, not because everything ended, but because it took them so long to understand what was truly happening inside their own heart. Then the Star card appears, and when this card comes through, there's something incredibly beautiful about it. Even though the distance is still there, even though the silence remains, there's still an invisible thread connecting them to you. They think about Sagittarius more than they would ever comfortably admit. They remember the conversations. They remember the sense of peace they felt around you. They remember the version of themselves that existed when things between you were simpler. Something is changing in the way they view this entire story. For what feels like the first time in a very long time, they're no longer searching for excuses to justify what happened. They're starting to look directly at the truth. And the more honestly they look, the more they realize there are things they still need to face. Because this period of silence has helped them understand something important. What they've been searching for all this time may never have truly disappeared. It may have simply been waiting for them to become honest enough to finally see it. What I'm noticing is that this honesty isn't coming easily, because this person has spent a very long time trying to control what they feel. When the Strength card appears here, I don't see strength in the way most people think about it. I see someone holding everything inside as tightly as they can, trying not to let their heart say too much, trying not to let their emotions take over, trying to avoid questions they don't feel ready to answer. But the harder they hold on, the more exhausted they become. I keep seeing someone reminding themselves over and over again that it's not that serious, that they're fine, that they can move on, that Sagittarius is just one chapter in a much bigger story. But what's strange is that every time they try to close that door, something pulls them right back. A song, a familiar road, a random comment they overhear, a tiny memory they should have forgotten a long time ago. And then the moon card starts coming through very strongly. There are nights when they don't really sleep. Their mind keeps moving even after everything around them has gone quiet. The thoughts they've been avoiding during the day somehow find their way back. The emotions they've buried begin rising to the surface again. And the more they try to make sense of it, the more confusing it becomes. Because what they're experiencing doesn't feel familiar. This is someone who's used to making decisions with logic, used to being in control of where their life is going, used to knowing exactly what they want. But this time feels different. This time, their emotions are moving ahead of their logic, and that makes them uncomfortable, maybe even scared, because I can feel a very real fear of losing control here. It's like they're standing in front of a door they never intended to open. Yet the longer they stand there, the harder it becomes to walk away. Then the Eight of Swords card appears. And honestly, this energy feels heavy, because this person is beginning to realize that most of the barriers they're seeing aren't actually coming from Sagittarius. They're coming from within. From old beliefs, old wounds, old stories they've been telling themselves for years. That opening up is dangerous. That loving someone too deeply makes you weak. That relying on your emotions is somehow a mistake. But those beliefs are starting to crack. Not because someone forced them to change, but because they can no longer fully believe them. Not when their heart keeps returning to the same person. Not when Sagittarius still has this kind of impact on them. And that's when the Two of Swords card comes through. I feel like they're standing between two different worlds. One is the version of themselves they've always known, the version that keeps a safe distance, the version that wants control, the version that needs certainty before taking a step forward. The other feels completely different, more vulnerable, more honest, but also much more frightening. Because if they move toward that version of themselves, they'll have to admit that what they're feeling is real. They'll have to admit that Sagittarius matters far more than they've allowed themselves to believe. And I can feel this internal struggle becoming stronger. They still try to act normal. They still go through their daily routines. They still try to keep everything under control. But underneath all of that, something is changing very quickly. It's like a wall that's been standing for years is beginning to show its first cracks. And what stands out to me most is that they're no longer spending all their energy denying what they feel. Now they're spending that energy trying to understand it. And sometimes that's when things become even more complicated, because the more clearly they understand their own emotions, the more they realize how much remains unsaid between the two of you. So many questions still don't have answers, and so many truths are still waiting quietly in the silence. And those unspoken truths are starting to become the very thing that won't let them rest. The High Priestess card comes through very strongly here, not in a mysterious or confusing way. It feels more like there's an entire world living beneath everything the two of you ever showed on the surface. Words they swallowed instead of speaking. Moments when they almost opened up and then stopped themselves. Times when they picked up their phone, stared at a message for what felt like forever, and eventually put it back down. This is someone who's become very comfortable keeping things inside. Comfortable letting people guess. Comfortable hiding what they truly feel. But lately they're beginning to realize how heavy that has become. Because feelings don't disappear just because we refuse to say them out loud. They stay, quietly existing, quietly growing, quietly asking to be acknowledged. I keep seeing someone caught in an ongoing battle with themselves. One part of them wants everything to stay exactly as it is. Another part knows they can't keep living in this silence forever. And that becomes even more noticeable when the Seven of Swords card appears. What's interesting is that I don't feel these are only secrets they've been keeping from Sagittarius. In some ways, it feels like they've been hiding things from themselves too. There are truths they've known for a long time but never wanted to face. Things they've constantly tried to rationalize. Things they've explained away from every possible angle just to avoid looking directly at them. But lately, that strategy isn't working anymore. Every time they try to turn away, the feeling returns. Every time they try to focus on something else, their mind drifts back to the same place, the same face, the same memory, the same question. What if they misjudged something that mattered far more than they realized? Then the Page of Swords card comes through. And there's something very specific about this energy. It feels like they're observing much more than they're acting. They want to know how Sagittarius is doing, how you're feeling, how you're moving forward. Sometimes all it takes is one small thing. A subtle change in the way you show up. A sense of peace they haven't seen in you before. A feeling that your world no longer revolves around them. And for some reason, that stays with them. It makes them think. Because it feels like they're finally realizing that time hasn't stopped. Life is still moving. The world keeps turning whether they're ready or not. And there are no guarantees that everything will simply wait for them to figure things out. That realization creates a very strange kind of pressure. Not pressure coming from Sagittarius. Pressure coming from their own awareness. The awareness that every opportunity has limits. That every silence eventually reaches an ending. That some doors, if left unopened for too long, may never open quite the same way again. I feel like this person is carrying so much inside, far more than they've ever shown. There are conversations they've rehearsed in their mind countless times, explanations, apologies, things they believe Sagittarius deserved to know a long time ago. But then the fear shows up again. Fear of being misunderstood, fear of rejection, fear that they may have waited too long. And it's that inner conflict that makes the Eight of Wands card feel so strong here. Everything feels like it's speeding up. Thoughts they've been suppressing are starting to pile up. Emotions they've kept locked away are looking for a way out. Silence doesn't feel comfortable anymore. Keeping everything hidden no longer feels like the easy option. It's almost as if they're standing at a threshold. Behind them are all the things they've never said. In front of them is a truth they know they'll eventually have to face. And what stands out most to me is that, for the first time, I don't feel them looking for an escape route. I feel them wondering what they're supposed to do if one day Sagittarius hears the entire story. And what I'm feeling is that the answer to that question may be much closer than they realize. Because there are moments in life when things can still be postponed. A phone call can wait until tomorrow. An apology can wait until next week. A difficult conversation can keep getting pushed aside. But eventually, life reaches a point where it no longer lets us do that. When the Tower card comes through, I don't see a random event appearing out of nowhere. I see something that has been building for a very long time. Layer by layer, decision by decision. Every time they chose silence instead of honesty. Every time they turned away instead of facing what was real. And now all of it is asking to be acknowledged. This person may be going through major changes in their personal life. Plans that aren't unfolding the way they expected. Things that once felt secure, suddenly feeling fragile. People they once relied on no longer showing up the same way. It's almost as if life is forcing them to take a deeper look at themselves. There's nowhere left to hide. Not enough noise left to drown out their real thoughts. And then the Judgment card comes through with a very powerful feeling. For the first time, I don't see them asking, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, they're asking something completely different. What did I miss? What wasn't I seeing? What did I lose along the way? Those aren't easy questions to sit with. Because the deeper they go, the more they realize Sagittarius was never really the problem. What they've truly been avoiding is themselves, their fears, their pride, their hesitation. The choices they made before they fully understood what actually mattered. I keep seeing them revisit old moments. Conversations, the times Sagittarius tried to open up. The times Sagittarius stayed longer than almost anyone else would have. Things they once took for granted. Things that now return as memories they can't stop thinking about. Then the Justice card appears. And this energy feels different. It feels like they're no longer interested in blaming circumstances. No longer blaming timing. No longer blaming other people. Part of them is beginning to understand that every choice leaves a mark. Every action creates a result. And some things, once they've happened, can't simply be undone. That's why I feel them becoming more honest with themselves, even when it's uncomfortable. Because the truth rarely arrives to make us comfortable. It arrives to wake us up. And honestly, I think this person is right in the middle of that process. They're starting to look at Sagittarius through completely different eyes. Not just as an emotional connection. Not just as someone who crossed their path. But as someone who brought something very real into their life. Something rare. Something meaningful. Something that may not be easy to find again. And the more they feel that familiar presence slipping away, the more they seem to understand its value. What's interesting is how quickly all of this is happening. Faster than they expected. Maybe even faster than they can fully process. Then the World card comes through. And it feels like a door is quietly beginning to close behind them. An old chapter. An old version of themselves. An old way of thinking. Everything is changing, not on the surface, at the root, in the way they see themselves, in the way they see Sagittarius, in the way they see a future they once believed they had plenty of time to figure out. But now, time doesn't feel comforting anymore. It feels urgent. Because, for the first time, they're beginning to realize that if they continue standing still, they may end up witnessing something they never imagined. A life where Sagittarius keeps moving forward. A life where new doors continue opening, whether they're standing on the other side of those doors or not. And that thought seems to be exactly what's keeping them awake more than it used to. Not because they don't know how they feel. Honestly, I think they've known for quite some time. What's unsettling them now is that, for the first time, they're allowing themselves to consider a possibility they never truly believed was real. The possibility of losing Sagittarius. That energy comes through very strongly with the King of Pentacles card. This person is starting to think differently, more maturely, more realistically. This no longer feels like a passing emotion or a fleeting thought that comes and goes. They're asking themselves serious questions now. What if Sagittarius isn't here anymore? What if one day they genuinely move forward? What if the person they always assumed would be there is no longer waiting? It feels like they spent a long time believing time was on their side, believing they could deal with everything later. Say what needed to be said later, make important decisions later. But they're beginning to realize that life doesn't always work that way. And what's interesting is that this shift isn't coming from fear alone, it's also coming from admiration. Because right beside that, the Queen of Pentacles card appears. And this energy makes me think a lot about Sagittarius. Something about you is changing, not loudly, not in a way that seeks attention, but it's unmistakable. It's the energy of someone who has finally learned how to put themselves first. Someone who no longer needs validation from the outside world. Someone who's building a life of their own with more peace, more confidence, and more self-respect than before. And that seems to make them feel two things at once. Pride and worry. Pride because they're witnessing your growth. Worry because they're no longer certain they'll be part of where you're headed. I keep seeing them watching from a distance, and sometimes it's the smallest moments that affect them the most. A smile, a new achievement, a lighter energy around you, a quiet sense of contentment. It's almost as if Sagittarius is becoming the version of themselves they were always meant to grow into. And somehow, that realization forces this person to confront what they once overlooked. Then the Ten of Pentacles card comes through. And suddenly, I don't just see thoughts about the present. I see thoughts about the future, thoughts that go much deeper than attraction or emotion. I see them imagining possibilities, imagining what could have been, how they might have walked beside you through different chapters of life, how they might have built something lasting together, how different things might feel today if they had chosen differently back then. Sometimes people don't fully understand the value of something until they begin to feel it slipping away. And honestly, that's the feeling I'm picking up here. Because Sagittarius no longer feels like an option in their mind. You feel like a loss they don't want to experience. Something precious they may not have protected the way they should have. There's a deep sense of regret here. But not necessarily regret over what happened. More regret over what never happened. The plans that were never made real. The conversations that never took place. The feelings that were never expressed when there was still time. Then the Four of Wands card appears. And what stands out to me is that this person isn't spending nearly as much energy protecting their ego anymore. They're thinking about something entirely different. They're thinking about where they feel at home, where they feel understood, accepted, seen for who they truly are. And somehow, every time they imagine that feeling, Sagittarius appears in the picture. Not as some distant fantasy, not as an impossible dream, but as something very real, very close, something that was once right in front of them. Something they simply didn't recognize at the time, but things feel different now. Because the more they watch you moving forward, the more aware they become of time. And for the first time, I don't feel them fearing the truth itself. What they seem to fear most now is something else entirely. The possibility that by the time they're finally ready to say everything they've been holding inside, Sagittarius may no longer be standing in the place where they once asked you to wait. What stands out to me most is that this energy no longer feels like someone looking for a way out. It feels like they've reached a point where staying silent hurts more than telling the truth. The Judgment card comes through once again, but this time it carries a completely different feeling. These aren't passing thoughts anymore. They're not conversations that briefly cross their mind only to be pushed away again. I see someone standing face to face with themselves. No place left to hide. No reason left to postpone what they already know. There are things they've wanted to say for a very long time. things that probably should have been said long ago. Maybe it's an explanation. Maybe it's an apology. Or maybe it's simply the truth about what has really been happening inside their heart all this time. And what moves me about this energy is that they're no longer trying to prove they were right. They just want to be understood. They want Sagittarius to know that behind all the distance, behind all the silence, there was so much happening beneath the surface that they never found the courage to share. I keep seeing someone replaying that conversation in their mind, again and again. If I saw Sagittarius today, what would I say? Where would I even begin? If I could go back to the moment everything started changing, would I choose differently? Then the Ace of Cups card appears, and what I feel here isn't a perfect story. It's not a guaranteed ending. It's simply a heart that finally wants to be honest. A heart that's exhausted from pretending none of this mattered. Exhausted from keeping its emotions hidden behind layer after layer of protection. This person is beginning to realize that some connections only reveal their true impact when we're willing to look directly at them. And somehow, Sagittarius seems to be one of those connections in their story. There's also a very real fear here. But interestingly, it doesn't feel like a fear of rejection. It feels more like the fear of arriving too late. The fear that while they've been trying to understand themselves, Sagittarius has continued moving forward. And that's why the Six of Swords card appears carrying so much emotional weight. I feel them wanting to move beyond what happened, wanting to leave old cycles behind, wanting to stop living inside questions that never seem to have answers. But they also know there's only one way through it. They have to face this conversation. There isn't another path. There isn't a shortcut. There isn't another delay that will make this easier. Because every day that passes without saying something seems to add another layer of regret. And little by little, that regret is becoming stronger than the fear. Honestly, I think this may be the first time they've truly understood the value of honesty. Not honesty with Sagittarius, honesty with themselves, admitting that they miss you, admitting that they still think about you, admitting that some feelings never disappeared the way they once convinced themselves they had. Then the Lover's card comes through. And whenever this card appears in an energy like this, I always feel a moment of choice. Not a choice between two people, a choice between two paths. One path keeps everything locked inside and continues carrying words that were never spoken. The other accepts the risk, accepts the vulnerability, and chooses to tell the whole truth. I feel like they're standing incredibly close to that moment now, closer than they've ever been before. But what's interesting is that this energy is no longer entirely in their hands. Because after everything that's happened, after all the time that's passed, after every decision that's been made, I feel like they're beginning to understand something important. They can choose to tell the truth. They can choose to open their heart. They can choose to take a step towards Sagittarius. But what they can't choose is the response they'll receive. And that may be the very thing making their heart race the most right now. Because somewhere deep down, they know that if their eyes ever meet yours again, it won't feel the same as it did before. Something has changed. And neither of you are quite the same people you used to be. And I think that's where I'm going to leave this reading. If something in this story spoke to your heart, take what resonates with your journey and gently let the rest drift away. I've always believed that the people who enter our lives bring something meaningful with them. Sometimes that meaning is obvious. Sometimes it takes a long time before we truly understand why a connection mattered the way it did. Whether this reading reminds you of someone in your own life or simply offers a different perspective for where you are right now, I hope you continue moving forward with a sense of peace, confidence, and self-worth. The kind that comes from knowing your value doesn't depend on anyone else's choices. Thank you, Sagittarius, for spending this time with me today. Your presence here means more than you probably realize. I truly appreciate each and every one of you. Take gentle care of yourself. Keep trusting your path. Keep choosing what feels honest and healthy for your heart. And wherever your journey leads from here, I hope it brings you closer to the life you're trying to build for yourself. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you again in the next reading. Bye for now.